So in this instance, RX loss actually meant that I lost my RX. There is no more RX on this thing. So this is what you're greeted with when you open the box of this thing. And like I've said in the past, Diatone is a company that at least strives to do things well. And I give them kudos for this because it kind of gives a little sense of extra premiumness on top. It's like a high-end computer that is designed for somebody that doesn't know anything about computers, and you open the box and it's got instructions on what to do and how to take the foam out of the inside of the case. Anyways, let's take a look at the quad. And this is an interesting quad because I haven't tested things in this category for a while, and I know everybody's most interested in the weight, and so let's look at that first. The weight of this thing is about 167 grams with the antenna that's pre-installed here and the receiver that's ripped out. 167 grams with this 850 milliamp 4S battery, which I think is the appropriate size battery for this thing. 175 grams. That's a pretty low weight. Okay, before going any further and talking about the weight discussion and the motor discussion, all that stuff, let's talk about all the parts in the quad. So this is a Diatone quad. It does have Diatone construction quality, and I would point that out up front because Diatone really does a good job building their quads. You can see here that the motor wires run underneath the ESC board and then wrap around and come up and solder onto the ESC, which is really nice. The screws that they use on this thing are like brushed on the edges and chromed on the edges, so they do look really, really nice on this. Like, the build quality of this thing looks super nice. And something else that's super interesting about this is that it's one of the most popular pictures on my Instagram within a day. This thing got up in the top 10 pictures I've posted amount of likes, and I'm pretty impressed to see that because I didn't think that people were terribly interested in something of this kind of stature and status and whatnot. I've tested these lightweight things kind of a lot over the years, and I first did it on the Brother Hobby 1407 motor. It's like 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago, and I had really mixed results. While it flew fine, what I found was that the quad really did not have a lot of control feel, and it was really squirrely and hard to control in the air as a result because the motors didn't seem like they could manage a 5-inch prop. It was fantastic on 4-inch, especially a 4-inch twin blade, the 1407, but it just couldn't really manage something bigger than 4 inches. Now fast forward to today, the code has gotten drastically better. Cannot emphasize how much better the code has gotten. And it's made something like this with 1408 motors on a 5-inch super ultra aggressive prop fly pretty darn well, as long as you stay above about 15-20% throttle and stay out of the top 5-10% of the throttle range. As long as you're staying in that like middle range of the throttle, you're getting really good control. Once you drop below a certain RPM, it feels like the quad just isn't, the motors aren't able to spin the prop up to get the control that you want to get. So as long as you stay above that certain throttle RPM, you're good. And you can't increase your minimum RPM above like 6 or 7% because the quad kind of just hovers at 7 or 8%. So it's hard to descend if your quad is level. You kind of have to dive to descend. And once you're up at the top of the throttle range, it feels like there isn't enough RPM overhead for the flight controller to actually manage things as easily. So it gets, again, really squirrely and really hard to control. These are minor differences, but down at the bottom, it's much more significant than up at the top. But yeah, as long as you're in that middle range, it flies really, really well, similar to a quad with 22 or 23 size motors. Now, this is the effect that I've explained is the effect that you get when you run a motor that's too small for the prop size. I did not have any 4-inch props to test this on. I was fresh out of 4-inch props, but on this as in the 5-inch category, I do think this prop is a really good choice for this quad because it is, I think it's the lightest prop on the market, but it is super aggressive. If you put this prop on a quad that weighs 500 grams, the amp draw will be absolutely crazy. It'll be super duper aggressive because it's such an aggressive prop and it has to deal with so much weight. But on something that's so super light, it doesn't have a lot of weight to deal with, and the quad moves freely through the air, not only because the body is small and everything is tiny, because it doesn't have any weight, so it can really move around the air easily, and there isn't a lot of weight for the motors and battery and everything to have to manage. The result is that this prop is not super duper aggressive on something like this that moves so freely through the air. And so what I found was on this little 850 milliamp battery, I can hold the throttle open for 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds and am not getting voltage warnings. And that's because the prop is doing its job. It doesn't have a lot of kick when you punch the throttle, but once you get moving, it really does haul and it moves really nicely. Now I did try this on the 5146.6 as well as the S4 blade. It did fine on the S4 blade, but it wasn't quite as fast. It was very similar, but not quite as fast. It did have a little bit better bottom end because I'm guessing the S4 blade is less aggressive, so it's easier to push through the air. On the 5146, it was just not good. It may have been just too heavy. It just had no control feel at all. And like I said again earlier, these are a result of having a motor that's just too small for the prop size. While this thing is awesome and really does fly awesome, I do think that a 2204 motor would be a better choice for this quad. It would not only be more efficient because of the width of the motor, and the stator height is what draws a lot more, depending on a lot of factors. Stator height tends to draw more amps. I'm going to stay away from that. It's a little bit wishy-washy. Anyways, I would recommend a 2204 size motor for this quad, but this 1408 size motor does fly totally well. And so the other thing I want to point out is that today, typical race quads are something in the order of 450, 500 grams. They have 2208.5 motors with a super ultra aggressive prop and a 13 to 1500 milliamp 6S battery. People don't seem to realize that a 1300 6S is larger than an 1800 4S battery that people don't race with. You don't race with an 1800 4. I mean, very few people race with an 1800 4S battery. But basically what's happening is that you're just driving the weight of the quad up. You're using bigger motors because you need more power, and using a more aggressive prop because you think you're just going to make it go faster. I got to mention here that I'm not a racer. I have done a lot of testing in the racing department, but clearly I'm not a very skilled racer. I don't race, but I have done a lot of testing in this area. And so I personally feel that it is more beneficial to go with a more finesse type build where you are targeting a certain control characteristic or a certain throttle characteristic or something of that sort, and you have a much lighter quad that won't just destroy itself when you hit that metal gate. It won't just explode into nothing, because I did crash this thing a couple of times and they weren't light crashes. That's just the only DVR that actually recorded, unfortunately. I think my goggles are going bad or something. And I didn't even bend a prop in the crashes. So when you're down at 275 grams all up weight, even if you're going super fast, it's way more durable than if you're going 130 miles per hour with a quad that's 450 grams all up weight. Now, I've also tested this weight kind of theory, and I've found that you don't necessarily need to have a 200 and something gram quad all up weight to get the maximum performance benefits from having a low weight quad. The biggest benefit of having low weight on your quad is that your quad no longer drifts in the turns. It grips. It doesn't matter if you're going the right direction or not. As long as you're turning and you're giving it gas, that thing is gripping through the turn aggressively. And it's not something I'm used to because my acro quads do not do that like that. The 7-inch quad sort of somewhat does, but not anything like something that's this light, this fast, and this powerful. But you don't need to be 275 grams. I have found that around a 250 gram build with about 180 gram battery gives you about the best grip performance that you can expect from a 5-inch tri-blade. Moving up to quad blades is a different story entirely, but from a 5-inch tri-blade, that's pretty much maximum-ish. It gets a little bit better once you go lower weight, but not a whole lot better. That's kind of the threshold that I've tested and found that that kind of weight is about where you want to be. So you want your build to be around, nowadays I would say a 6S build should be, if you can achieve it, around 230, 240 grams, and then you add a sub 200 gram battery, which would mean a 1000 milliamp or 1050 milliamp 6S battery on something like 1650 or 1700 kV, and that would be my choice. I'm telling you all this because I've recently done a lot of testing in this area because I do have a lot of things coming in the near future which are pretty awesome. So take it with a grain of salt. I'm not a racer, but I've done a lot of testing in this area. That is the general build spec that I personally would fly if I was racing, but again, I don't race. So yeah, let's leave it at that. And this thing is awesome. The canopy looks super nice. It's not super durable. It's like plasticky. I'm sure it's going to hold up fine because the weight of this thing is so low. If you want this thing, I would say that it is totally fine. I would like the ESC performance to be a little bit better. The 6S version of this same Mamba stack tends to perform a little bit better than this. I have it in 2 of my 5-inch acro quads that are heavier, way heavier than this thing, and I have no dipping, no throttle issues at all. However, this thing on 4S does have